Good afternoon and welcome back, everybody, to another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. Very happy to welcome back somebody you may have seen here before, but if not, Yaron Schmid. Yaron, how are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. We're excited to have you here. For those who may have missed it, didn't know what you were signing up for, I'll just go ahead. I'll tell you, you found the right spot. We're talking stories behind the shots, wildlife photography tales, because everybody loves a great story, but most importantly, tips as well. So thank you for being here. Everybody joining us, whether you're here on YouTube, Facebook, Vimeo, any of our streaming platforms, thanks for joining us today. If you have any questions that you want to get over to Yaron, please feel free to get them in. You can use the comment section. Unless you're joining us on Zoom, just use the Q&A tab and we'll make sure to get them over to him. But I'm going to slide out of the way and hand over to the mic to Yaron, and I'll see you back in a little bit.
All right. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, and we're up. All right, everyone. I'm Yaron Schmid. I'm a veterinarian. I'm a wildlife photographer. And together with my partner, Amy, we lead safaris mostly in East Africa. And today I'm going to share with you some of the stories behind my recent shots. I'll try to share with you the thought process that went in my head when I got these shots. And as I tell you the stories, I'll try to share with you some of the tips that I think are important that can make your photography or wildlife photography a better experience. So the best way to start is from the beginning, and the beginning is the preparation stage. The most important part in the preparation, as I see it, is setting goals. If I didn't just roll in with my car and got this shot, there was some preparation that had to be done. I had to know, where can I find these Nubian ibex? I had to know, where do they like to jump and hang out? What time is sunrise? How long will it take me to get there? What's the weather like? And so on. And the goal was to get this shot, and that's the most important thing, because from it I was able to get everything else. So setting the goal is your number one thing that will get you in focus, get everyone around you in focus, and that they know what you're looking for. And when you set that goal, the next step, as I see it, is envisioning. Now, some people will say envisioning is like sending a message to the universe and like the laws of attraction. And if you really imagine and envision something, it's going to happen to you. If you know me and my background, I'm less of a spiritual guy. I'm more a scientific guy. I have a background of math and physics, and I'm a helicopter pilot, and I'm a veterinarian. So to me, the envisioning part is more like getting things organized in my head. I know what I want to get. That's my goal. And now I'm just like kind of closing my eyes and imagining how I'm getting it, and what are the shots that I want to get, and how am I going to compose the shot, and what do I need to do in order to get these shots. And my partner, she's a big believer in, she's more the spiritual part. And she even created this logo on the bags that we give our guests. And that says, first you must believe it, then you will see it. And I'll tell you a few stories so you will see what I'm talking about. This is Luluka. She's a very famous leopard in Masai Mara. And when we heard that earlier that day she was seen carrying her newborn cub in her mouth, which is a very rare and very special sighting, we got excited. And we had the opportunity to go and look for her the next morning. My plan was to leave early in the morning before sunrise and go to the area where Luluka is, and hopefully we'll see her and her cub. Things got a little bit out of hand and out of control. And we didn't leave camp until after breakfast, after 8 a.m. And as we were driving towards the area where Luluka was, we saw 2 cheetahs. They were trying to make a kill, but they missed. And Amy was telling our guide, Dominic, that she really wants to see Luluka carrying her cub in her mouth. I was kind of giggling in the back, because if you know a little bit about wildlife photography and photographing big cats in Africa, you know that the best time to see him is early in the morning or late in the evening. So the chances of even seeing Luluka, let alone seeing her with her cub, is pretty slim now that we left so late. So I was in favor of staying in with the cheetahs and see if they're going to make another attempt. But she was really persistent and I didn't really want to fight. So, and I'm sure many of you know what I'm talking about. So we just went and we drove to the area where Luluka was. And when we got there, this is what we saw. Luluka was just standing there next to the bushes. And literally like 3 or 4 minutes later, she walked into the bushes and disappeared. And even though there were like other cars around, one by one, they started leaving when they saw that nothing is happening and nobody can see Luluka. And we were the last car to stay. And we saw that, again, she's not coming out. So we had to drive and pick up our guests. And as we were driving, a minute or so after we started driving, our guide, for a reason that I'm still not sure what it was, he just turned the car around and this is what we saw. Luluka came out of the bushes carrying her precious cargo in her mouth. And she came very close to our car, walking literally towards our car. And we were the only car there. And it was just amazing. One of the best sightings that I've ever had. I would never imagine seeing something like that, let alone when we left so late in the day. And that got me a little bit of thinking, like how she said that she wants to do it. We went against the odds. We left very late, and yet we still saw it when we were the only car there. So that's just one of many stories that she had set her goals, she set in her intentions, and we got to see something that that we wanted. Another example, we landed at the Olar Motorogi Conservancy in Kenya, and whenever we meet a guide for the first time, we always talk to him about what are our goals, what are the things that we'd like to see. We do it at the beginning of every safari, and we do it at the beginning of every day. And here we just, and this is something, by the way, that we also encourage our guests, the people that join our safaris, we encourage them also to share with us what's their biggest wishes, what are the things that they want to see, because we really want to try and make people's dreams come true, if as much as we can. So we told him that we'd like to see baby animals as young as can be, and Amy told him that she'd like to see an elephant giving birth. Now, the way that she's asking for sightings, to me, it looks like she's ordering like food from a menu. It's she wants to see an elephant giving birth. Well, sure, pretty easy to achieve. And it was just amazing. Like I was like giggling, and the guide was like a little bit giggling, but he did say that on his way to pick us up, he actually saw a giraffe that he thinks that was just starting to give birth, and if we'd like to go, we can go and see it. And obviously we did. So we drove to the area, and this is what we saw. We got to see the whole birth process as the baby slowly emerging came out to this world. Got to see the whole birth. We got to see the mothers kissing the baby for the first time, the baby standing up for the first time, and then nursing for the first time. And even though it wasn't elephant giving birth, it was still a very special sighting. So if I'm going back to the menu analogy, if we ordered food from the menu, this is not the foods that we ordered, but we didn't send the food back to the kitchen. We enjoyed it very much. And that moment and many other moments got me thinking, she's like the way that she's asking for things and that she's envisioning them, maybe there's something to it. She wanted to see a lioness carrying a cub in her mouth, and boom, later on that day, we saw it. She wanted to see Scarface the lion after no one's seen him for 2 weeks, and the next morning we saw him. So I started practicing this. Again, it's to the point that it's not that I believe in, like, again, laws of attraction and that if I'll think really hard on something, it's going to happen. But A, you got nothing to lose. And B, as I said, it gets me more in focus. So I've been photographing snowy owls for the past 5 or 6 years, and I was very lucky to see them on the ground and on the tree. I got to see a snowy owl with the full moon rising behind it, flying in beautiful early morning light. And I even got to see them in the snow, but I never got to see a snowy owl during a snowstorm. And this is something that I really wanted to see, and it was one of my biggest goals. Again, speaking of setting goals, it was one of my biggest goals for this past winter. So when I heard that there's like a very slight chance of snow the next morning that I happened to be off work, I thought I'm going to take that chance, and I rented a car and drove to the location the next morning. the forecast was talking about 50% chance of less than centimeter of snow, which is basically nothing. And to be honest, even if the forecast said that there are going to be like 3 snowflakes that will fall at 7:01, and 7:02, I would still probably take that chance and go. And as I was getting closer to the area, the snow was falling heavier and heavier. It was accumulating way more than they predicted. And I got to the parking lot. I was the first one there. There was no one else. I got my gear, started looking for snowy owls. I started walking. And if you've ever been if you ever stepped on the snow, you were the first person early in the morning after a big snowstorm, you probably know the feeling that I had. It's like a very magical and peaceful moment when the snow is falling and everything is so quiet around you. But the snowy owls were not there. And I walked miles in one way and I started walking back towards the car and nothing. The only thing that I've seen were a few shorebirds and in the snow, and people started coming, like more photographers started coming, and they were looking for the snowy owls, but no one's seen any. And that's what I had to decide. What am I going to do now? And I always try to think about plan B when I'm in my planning, when I plan things. So the options were either staying and photographing these birds that I do see, or keep looking for the snowy owl, maybe looking for the snowy owl in other locations, or just forget about snowy owls. And I knew about a location that had foxes. It was a 2-hour drive from there. So maybe going there and photographing the foxes. I decided to try my luck with the snowy owls in other locations that I researched in advance. And I went to a second location, nothing. Third location, nothing. And when I got to the fourth location, again, there was no one else there. I walked to the beach. I got my binoculars and I started looking around, and this is what I saw. It was a beautiful snowy owl, a female in the snowstorm. I was so excited, but my excitement lasted for about 3 seconds because she immediately took off and into the snowstorm and disappeared. And even though I was very happy that I captured this, because this is what I really wanted, I was still a little disappointed because the sightings and the encounters that I had with snowy owls in the past were more intimate. I usually like to be by myself. I don't like when there are other people around. And in the past, slowly, I got the birds used to me, so I managed to get closer to them. And here I didn't have that opportunity. So I walked towards where I thought the snowy owl landed, and she took off again way before I got there. And then I decided to just wait and see what she does. And I saw her flying from one spot to another. So I kind of learned the pattern that she did, and I decided to wait for her in one of these spots. And within like 20 minutes or so, she landed pretty close to me. And it was the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen. And that's when I realized that all the sightings that I had so far of snowy owls in all the years, they're kind of the preview to this main show that I'm about to see. And not only that it's going to be an amazing show, I got front row seat to this, and it's a private show because it's just me there. So I managed to photograph her grooming herself and in the snow and flapping her wings and so on. And then she flew away from me and landed behind me. And I got my camera all set up in case she's going to fly again. And I just purchased a new camera at that time. I got the Nikon mirrorless, the Z9. And everyone were raving about how amazing the focus tracking is and how it's locking on the animal's eye when you focus. And I really was excited to try it already. And she gave me that opportunity. She took off and she left me with over 70 pictures, all pretty sharp, exactly what I dreamed about, like seeing a snowy owl flying in the snowstorm, including some of my favorite shots, which is this one and that one. And other than these 70 pictures that she left me with, she left me also with a big frozen smile on my face that it took a few days for it to disappear. So just to summarize what we talked so far, so we can continue, the most important part is setting your goals and envisioning what you wanna achieve. The second part in the preparation is once you know what your goals are, you have to do a little background research and check what the weather's going to be like, when is sunrise, when is sunset, what's the moon phase going to be like. If you want to photograph certain or see certain things, you have to make sure that the reserves or the camps that you go to or the guides that you use are familiar with this, and that you get the best places to achieve your goals. Always think of a plan B, because if you come to the area and now you don't get what you want, let's say you had a flat tire and you got there late, or you can't find the animal that you're looking for, if now you're going to start researching and trying to come up with a plan B, you're wasting precious time, because usually for wildlife photography, you're doing it early in the morning or late in the afternoon, and you don't have that precious time. So always think of plan B in advance. And just like I told you about the snowy owl, you have to be very patient and not chase the animal, and kind of study how it behaves and see how you can slowly get that into your and take advantage of the way that the animal behaves. And speaking of being patient, everyone knows that this is a very important thing in wildlife photography. Some people wait weeks and months to get a certain shot. And obviously, if you go on a safari, let's say, and you have 10 days, you don't have weeks or months. But still, if there are shots that are very important for you to get, let's say a cheetah making a kill, you can still be patient and wait a few hours or maybe a day and a half, if that's really what you want to achieve. So I'll give you a few examples of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about patience. This is Figlet, and Figlet is the leopard with the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen. She has like beautiful green turquoise eyes. And we saw her on New Year's Day. We had a beautiful champagne breakfast. We drank quite a bit. And when we saw Figlet, it looked like she had quite a few drinks herself. She had like squinty eyes. She looked very tired. And no one likes to get their picture taken when they're like, after they drank so much. So she kept her head like stuck in the leaves and branches covering her face. And obviously that was not an exciting picture. So we had to decide, what are we doing? Should we stay with her until she's a little more sober and more presentable? Or should we just drive and look for something else that maybe we're going to find and maybe not? Now, because Figlet is so important to us, because we've seen her before and she's a very special leopard, we decided to wait with her. And it didn't take long. It took about an hour and a half or two. She woke up, she washed her face, she drank her coffee, maybe too much coffee actually, and she became like a completely different leopard and much more presentable. And then later on, she moved to a different branch, and that's when she told me that she's ready for me to take her picture. And that's when I got this shot. So the difference between this shot and this one was just 2 hours of wait. And again, instead of getting a picture of a drunken leopard, I got this picture of a cover girl. And again, all it took is just a little bit of a wait. So that's just one example. Another example, I've been very lucky with serval cats, and we got to see them doing a lot of things, including hunting. And if you've ever seen them hunt, you know that they often jump into the tall grass. And it's very hard sometimes to get a clear shot that there's grass doesn't like cover their face. And that was something that I really wanted to get. I wanted to get like a nice clear shot of a serval hunting. And ideally, in my dreams, it was like the serval jumping towards me. That's what I really wanted to see. And during our last safari in September in Kenya, we had a guest that was his main goal. He wanted to see serval cats. He's been on 7 safaris. He's never seen any. And during our safari, he was very fortunate to see, I think, more than 10 different serval cats, including kittens. And because he had the patience, and that's what he wanted to see. And while we were watching this mother and kitten hunt, because we had all the time in the world, and we kind of studied and learned the way that she was hunting, and we could anticipate when and where she's going to jump, and we could position the car and wait for her. And that's how I managed to get this sequence of her hunting. And she's almost like I was imagining of her jumping pretty much towards me, no grass covering her face. And we got to see the whole hunting sequence until she got out of the bushes with a little lizard as a prize. Minutes later, again, the same technique, watching her, anticipating, and good positioning. And I got my dream shot that I was really hoping to see of a serval cat literally jumping towards us Again, no grass covering its face, and got to see the whole hunting process here as well. So when you, so the things that I mentioned, again, patience is very, very important. Everyone knows that. Time, sometimes you don't have that time when you're in the field, especially if you have very limited time. But if there's something that's really important for you, you have to be patient, because if you're going to wait, you're going to see the things that are more special and more exciting. And while you're waiting, make sure that your camera is waiting too, and it's ready in the right settings for whatever it is that you're waiting. You don't want to be waiting, let's say, half a day for cheetahs to hunt, only to find out that when they actually hunt, you happen to have a very slow shutter speed by mistake, without planning to do, like, let's say, a panning shot. So make sure that your camera is always ready at the correct setting for whatever it is that you're waiting for. But what happens if you don't get what you want? Sometimes we can set the goals and envision and do all the research in the world, and we still don't get what we want. Then what? Then you have to make the best of what you got. That's the time to show your creativity. That's the time to just appreciate nature. And I'll give you a few examples of what I'm talking about. This is Fig. It's the mother of the previous leopard that I showed you, Figlet. And this is the last picture that I took of Fig, because unfortunately a few months ago she got killed by a lion. And this is not a good picture of her. You can see the branches covering her face. So while I'm talking, I'll show you a better picture of Fig from a few years ago. So when we saw Fig, she was just chased by a lioness, and she had a little cub with her, and each one of them climbed into a different tree. And so you saw the picture, she climbed on a tree, she had branches covering her face, and it was really hard to get a clear shot of her. So what I decided to do is focus on what I have. I don't have her face, but I do have her paws, and I did focus on her paws. At the beginning, I focused on her front paw, that she had it dangling from the branch, and once in a while she would just like cats do when they're like making biscuits or kneading. So she was like extending her toes, and that's when I got this shot. And later on, she stood up, and I got this shot of her back legs. And even though you can't see her face and you can't see her body, this shot still tells pretty much the same story. You can still see from this picture that we're talking about a leopard, and he's probably looking at something, and he's relatively alert. And again, just by showing her paws, because I just made the best of what I had. And I didn't have her face, but I did her legs, and that's what I went for. Another example, these are the endangered Grevy's zebra. There are less than 2,000 of them in the wild, and I love photographing these guys. But when we saw them in Samburu, Kenya, it was in the middle of the day, the light was very harsh, and the zebras were very skittish. They were like, as you can see, they were mostly showing us their butts, and they were just walking away from us. So you can just give up and not photograph anything, or you can try and see how you can make the best of it. And when I saw that this zebra that you see in the picture is heading towards the two zebras on the bottom left side of the screen, I focused on that little butt that you see there, and I got this shot. And the idea behind it was that after processing, I'll be able to get this. So, and you're going to agree with me that getting out of this big mess, getting a shot like that is making the best of what you can. So again, I could have just given up and not take any pictures, or try to be a little more creative and try to make the best of what I got. Last story in that subject. This was taken in Masai Mara in Kenya, and it was taken during Kenya's rainiest months ever. All the roads were flooded, bridges were washed away, and we were pretty much stuck in camp. And we couldn't drive beyond 5 or 10 minute radius from camp. And we're driving, and it's pouring rain, and the guide keeps trying to convince us to go back to camp because we can't see anything. But we kept trying. So when we came across a troop of baboons sitting like this on a fallen tree, I knew that this is the best that we got, and we should try and make the best of it. So for the next 2 hours or so, we just photographed baboons in the rain. And I'll be honest, we had so much fun, like seeing how they shake away the rain. And it was a good time to practice for our guests, to practice the different camera settings, like shooting in the slow shutter speed, like here, 1/50th of a second, where you see the rain is like smudged, or a faster shutter speed, like 1/1000th of a second, or something in between, like as you see here, like 1/400th of a second. And if you told me before that I'm going to be photographing baboons for a few hours and I'm actually going to enjoy it, I would probably think that you're crazy. But we all did have a lot of fun. And this picture even won an award. Again, I would never think of doing it before, but we made the best of what we got. And that's the point of this story. So again, you can make the best of what you got. You can try and be creative if you can't get exactly what you want. And you have to keep in mind that sometimes nature has its ways and it's keeping things for you for next time. So you don't always see everything. You always have to save something for the next time. And even if you don't see anything, which again rarely happens, you can still put your camera down and enjoy the scenery, everything around you. And there are millions of people that would trade places with you, that would love to be where you are, whether it's Africa or Alaska or South America. So just soak in nature and just enjoy what you got. Again, that's if you really can't get anything out of it. This was taken in Masai Mara, and it was taken early in the morning. We came across 3 male lions that were sitting together, and it was still dark outside. And as we were debating whether we should stay with them or go look for something else, 2 of the lions just got up and left. And we stayed with this guy. And since the sky started being a little more colorful, we decided to wait with it and see what's going to happen. And indeed, minutes later, we got to see it we got to enjoy sunrise with the lion, and it seems like he was enjoying it as well. And the point that I'm trying to make in this story is that you can take a shot of whatever it is that you see, and it can be very nice, and people will like it and you may like it. But I always ask myself, how can I make this more interesting? How can I make it a better shot? So I always I never rest. I always try looking around and trying to think, what can I do better here? And I thought that it would be much nicer if the lion and the sun were closer to each other. Now I couldn't move the sun. It was a little difficult. And I definitely didn't want to go and try and move the lion. So what I asked was, I asked the guide if he can move the car a little forward. And I told him when to stop. I told him, keep going, keep going, keep going, stop. And when I told him to stop, that was the cue for the lion that I trained earlier. Just kidding, obviously, to stand up. And again, this is a much more, I find it to be a much more powerful image than the previous one. And all it took is for me to ask the guide to drive a little forward, and for the lion to stand up, which happened to be just by chance. So he got up. We had our little solar eclipse of the sun with this lion. And that's when I asked the guide if he doesn't mind like backing up a little bit towards where we were earlier. And that's how I got this shot. So if you do it in a kind and considerate to other people way, then there's no reason why the guide will refuse, unless there's like, the actual physical problem, like you're not allowed to go to a certain area or you can't physically cross a certain point. But otherwise, guides are used to photographers and they know that we drive them crazy a little bit. So taking control of the situation and moving things around a little bit, that can change the image dramatically, I think. Another example, this was taken in Opajeta Conservancy in Kenya. And the tents over there are pretty much around the watering hole. And we got out of the tent on our way to the afternoon game drive. And I saw this black rhino and her baby drinking from the water hole. And it's always exciting to be standing so close to the animal because you're outside your tent, you're not in a car, and you're standing very close, and there's just a little ditch that separates between the two of you, and the animal is not scared of you. And it's just very humbling experience and very special. But I was trying again to think, how can I make this a more special picture? Because as special as the moment is, it's not a special photo. And then I saw that if I will walk about 150 yards or so away from where my tent was, there was a pair of gray crowned cranes. And I thought that they can add a little more color to the picture. And that's what I did. I walked over, and it's the same two rhinos, but now with a little more colorful splash to the picture. I was hoping it was pretty hard to get them all with their heads up because the crown cranes kept like picking food from the ground, and the rhinos kept drinking water from the water hole. And I was trying to get all four of them with their heads up. But eventually I got 3 out of the 4 with their heads up. And I think that you're going to agree with me that this picture is way more special than the first picture that I showed you that I saw when I got out of the tent. And all it took is for me to walk 150 yards. Again, keep looking what can make the picture more interesting, what's in the background, what's in the foreground that can make your shot more interesting. So don't be shy to take control. Move around, whether asking your guide to drive a little bit left, right, forward, backward, or you are with your feet walk backward, the left or right or whatever. You can also move, even like little movements inside the safari car, for example, can make a huge difference. For example, if you shoot from the window or you shoot from the roof, or if you ask the person that's sitting in the front row of the car to switch places with you, the 6 feet difference between you can make a huge difference between like seeing a leopard with branches in its face to not, or to have the lion with the sun right in front of its face, or the sun in his butt area. So don't be shy to take control. You're paying a lot of money for this. Another subject that's very close to my heart is animal behavior. Since I'm a veterinarian, I studied animal behavior, and I try to take advantage of my knowledge in animal behavior so I can anticipate certain shots that are about to happen, so I can get ready with my camera and with my settings, and also so I can position myself in a better location to get the shot that I'm anticipating that's about to happen. So I'll tell you a few stories what I'm talking about. These lions were taken in a Boisho Conservancy, and they are what we call a honeymoon couple. And when you say that lions are in their honeymoon, it means that this is their mating time. And for 3 days, they mate every 15, 20 minutes. They don't eat. They usually stay pretty much in the same area. And again, some people will see this mating every 15 minutes as a honeymoon. Some people will think that it's a nightmare. That's up to you. But this is what we call a honeymoon couple. And when we saw them as we were heading back to camp in the evening, because I knew this about lions, that they probably will stay in the same area, then I told our guide that I'd like to come back here early in the morning. And because they were located on top of a hill, I thought that this could be a good opportunity to get silhouette shots of them. And indeed, when we rolled in the morning, we got to see this romantic scene of them enjoying their honeymoon as the color of the light in the sky kept changing. At first, he was following her blindly. As the colors changed, she was following him. And to anyone, it looked like the perfect vacation and perfect honeymoon. But just like any couple, they did get to fight a little bit. That's part of the deal of being in a couple. And so we got to see that. But the beautiful thing about fighting is that you can also make up at the end. And we got to see them making up. And then at the end, they just sat and stared into each other's eyes. He probably promised her that whatever he did, he's not going to do again. And we enjoyed sunrise. They enjoyed sunrise. And it was just a beautiful scene that wouldn't happen if I didn't know this about lion, that they will be there probably in the morning, and that this hill can be a good, a little bit of planning, because I knew that this hill could be a good area for silhouettes. And also another point that's important here, this was taken in a private conservancy where you're allowed to drive early in the morning, way before sunrise. You can go off-road. The camps are situated in the center of the reserve. So if you went to a national park, sometimes they don't allow you to get in before sunrise or just like a few minutes before sunrise. So you probably wouldn't be able to get this. And when people ask us, why do you go to these expensive properties and expensive reserves? This is why, because some people, they go to Africa once in their life, and you want to make that one time count. You want to have the best experience. And we believe that staying in conservancies, for example, and using like professional guides is worth it for your experience. Another example of knowing animal behavior and how to channel it to your benefit. We spotted a tower of giraffes. That's what the group of giraffes is called. A tower of giraffes when we saw them from far away. And they were all standing there, not moving, looking in the same direction. And if you know a little bit about giraffes' behavior, you know that most of the time, when you see them doing it, there's a cat somewhere and they're looking at a cat. They have very good eyesight and they're kind of like very curious animals. And I would say that 95% of the time that I've seen giraffes standing this way, they were looking at a cat. The other 5%, because of their curiosity, they're usually looking at a driver changing a flat tire, or that there's a car that's stuck in the mud and people are trying to pull it out, and the giraffes will just aggregate and come and look at this wonder. So when we saw this, we drove in, and indeed there was a cat. We got to see the tail end, literally, of a leopard that was just walking into the bushes. And I knew that now that the leopard is gone, I have like a couple minutes before the giraffes will go back to whatever it was that they were doing, like eating probably, and they'll walk away. So I asked our guide to drive in front of the giraffe that you see here on the right side of the picture. And I changed camera to a wider lens. I changed my aperture to a smaller aperture, and I managed to get this shot. So again, it's the same scene as I showed you earlier. All it took was like for me to know that the giraffes are probably going to stay there. So in guiding the guide exactly where I want him to position the car so I can get the shot. And again, changing the lens and everything. So these are things that the knowledge of their behavior enabled me to come to the conclusion that this is the shot that I want to take. So use your knowledge of animal behavior and try to anticipate what the animals are going to do and be prepared with your camera for it. And if you don't know about the animals, you can read. Sometimes when I am about to photograph an animal that I don't know much about it, I read about it. And if you don't read about it, then at least go with a guide or with a tour leader that understands animal behavior so you can take advantage of it. Because sometimes the difference between a guide that knows the animal behavior and they tell you, oh, the leopard is about to jump over the stream, versus someone that doesn't tell you, you may miss the shot. You get the point. Another thing is interactions. Interactions are also something that I love to photograph. The way that I see when you photograph interactions, sometimes when it's just two individuals, it's pretty straightforward. You just photograph whatever it is that you see. And if it's like a very tense moment, you may want to photograph at a relatively high shutter speed, like the lions fight or so. But when you shoot interactions, you want to, if it's something that touches you and your heart, it will probably touch your viewer's heart. And that's what we want. We want to touch the viewer's heart. We want them to fall in love with these animals or to feel something towards them. So they will care about them and they'll want to protect them. So always try to look for these interactions, because these are the best shots that you can get. And how do you know sometimes what to photograph when there's a big group? For example, let's say there's a pride of 14 lions. How do you know which lion to look at? I usually tell people to try and don't photograph for a minute, look around and see who's the active one, who's the naughty one, who's the funny one, who's the brave one, and just focus on that one. You may miss other shots, but there's a good chance that you're going to get good stuff if you're just going to focus. Like, for example, here, there were a few lionesses with cubs at different ages, and they were all relatively active, but I noticed that this particular cub was the most active, and he's the one that really seeked attention from different lionesses. I was just following him, and I got him or her, and I got to see them play. I got to see them love each other, and it was just very rewarding watching this whole thing unfold in front of you. And again, I may have missed something else with other lions in the group, but choosing this particular one and waiting a little bit, that rewarded me with this set. Another example, this was taken in Samburu in Kenya. It was taken in the middle of the day. It was very hot. and the elephants were just resting in the shade. Um, our car was surrounded by maybe 30 or 35 elephants, and it was really hard to choose where to look and what to photograph because they were all over surrounding us. But I noticed that there are like two main actors in this scene. This baby that was on the right side of our car and another baby that was on our left side of our car. And after photographing right side, left side, right side, left side, I decided to focus on this guy because I figured that he's the one that's going to deliver the goods. And indeed, for the next half an hour or so, we got to see this one just play with his sister that all she wanted was just to sleep. And he was so naughty. He was climbing on her, and he even fell as he was like trying to climb on her. But that didn't stop him. He kept like jumping on her again. And again, look how tolerant she was. She let him do whatever he wanted, stepping on her face, sitting on her face, and eventually just resting. And again, this was just by looking around, recognizing that this is the guy that will deliver the goods, and he did. And again, as I said, it touched us, it made us laugh, it made us love, and that's what it does to the viewers when they see it. So always look for interactions because these are the most interesting shots. Try to find the one that's more active or the one that's like a little different that will deliver the things that you're looking for. Try to photograph moments that touch your heart and that they will touch other people's hearts. And again, these shots eventually tell a story. They tell either a funny story or a love story. And sometimes there's no story, but sometimes if you compose the picture correctly, you can tell a story even if that story doesn't exist. The last point that I'd like to mention, and I'm just going to touch it just lightly, is showing animals in their environment. Our tendency when we photograph wildlife, especially when we're at the beginner stages, is to get as close as we can to the animals, to zoom as much as we can to their faces and get like pretty much like portrait shots of their faces. And that's not always the most, I mean, it's nice, but it can be boring. Like everyone took pictures of rhinos. This is a black rhino and she has a little baby. But when I saw that the mountain behind them, which is Mount Kenya, is no longer covered by clouds, I asked our guide to reposition the car. So the mountain will be behind the rhino, and that's how I got to get shots like this or that one. Again, just looking around, lifting your head from the camera, looking around and thinking how things can be more interesting. Or this fox, for example, was taken in a residential area in New York. And these foxes are usually not shy. They come pretty close to people. But on that day that there was a blizzard in New York, they didn't get close. And I knew that there's no point to try and chase them. So I just changed strategy and actually stayed far away from them and tried to capture a moment that shows them in their environment. Or this image. This is a lioness in the Serengeti. When we spotted her, we drove and were pretty much underneath her, and we got shots of her sitting on the branch. But again, it's not as exciting. So when everyone were done taking their pictures, I asked the guy to actually drive away from her, and I guide the guide exactly where I want the car to be positioned. So that branch is kind of like hovering above the acacia trees in the background, and he just made a more interesting shot that shows the animal in its behavior. So don't forget to look around. Don't forget to lift your head from the camera. Don't always just like zoom in and just look through that narrow tunnel that you're looking with your zoom lens. See what's happening. Like often I look behind me, like everyone's photographing a leopard in front of us. Sometimes one time I remember like looking behind while everyone's photographing a leopard, and behind us came a giraffe, and it was a beautiful sunset so you could see the giraffe and the sunset. So if you look around, you may see some things that are more interesting or can make the picture more special. So don't be shy to lift your head from the camera and to zoom out. And that's pretty much it. That's all I had to tell you. I hope that you find some of the stuff that I told you interesting. And if there are any questions, this is the time to ask. And if you don't have questions, I'm just gonna show you my contact info in case anyone wants to reach out to us. We're available on Facebook, Instagram. You can shoot us an email if you want to join one of our safaris in the future. Please feel free to message us. We do private and guided safaris, and we'll be happy to host you.
Awesome. If nobody has questions, which we already do, don't worry, everyone. But
Okay.
we could just leave this up for 15 minutes and hang out. No, people are asking questions. That's great. If you didn't and you have a question that you do want to get in, go ahead, drop them below in the comments section, and we'll make sure to get them over to Yaron. Or if you're nervous that we'll ask your question, it's all anonymous. Don't freak out. But you can always, like Yaron said, send him a message, and I'm sure he'd be happy to answer it. So I want to go back to something you said earlier in the beginning of the presentation, which I think is really interesting, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit on. Is you use the word practice, which I think is something that everybody always tends to maybe put by the wayside, if you will. You get a new camera, you're excited, you would just want to go out, you want to shoot, and all of a sudden you automatically expect to be, the next Cartier-Bresson. And that's obviously not how it goes. Obviously, in anything you do, you've got to practice. But for something like wildlife photography, where, having access to animals might be limited outside of a zoo, what's your recommendation for being able to practice that? Do you just say go to the zoo and spend as much time there and get acclimated with the animals, or do you have other recommendations?
No, I mean, as you said, practice is very important. And we often get people that they come on safari and they just bought a brand new camera for the occasion, but they don't know how to operate it. And it's a shame that you're spending so much time like trying to figure out your camera while you're in the field, instead of enjoying and or either capturing the pictures that you'd like, or just enjoying it, instead of you get frustrated because you didn't practice. So practicing is very, very important, especially if you get a new gear. Now, there's always a local park by you, and there's always something that you can practice, even if it's just people with their dogs. Like a dog can be a good practice, like a dog that's running in the park can be a good practice for cheetahs that are running. Or you're always going to see some birds or butterflies. So you can even practice on, I remember when I started my wildlife photography, and I was very into like panning shots. So I was practicing panning shots on passing cars and taxis and so on. So there's always something that's around you that you can practice on, and then later on use that knowledge and that skill that you gained and use it for wildlife. So local parks, I would say that's the best place to start. Not necessarily in the zoo, because in the zoo you're relatively limited.
Great. Now, Michael, who's joining us on YouTube, wanted to ask, are you shooting handheld? And if so, how do you deal with image shake?
So when I'm in Africa, I usually use a beanbag, and I put my camera on a beanbag. If I'm photographing, for example, the snowy owls that I was showing you earlier, that's on a tripod, and I use a gimbal head. Otherwise, if it's there are moments that I'm shooting handheld, but I think it's mostly either in Africa that I'm using a beanbag or on a tripod. I do, now that I'm thinking about it, I do use handheld sometimes in Africa, especially if I'm using my smaller lens. So that's the way to reduce camera shake: tripod and beanbag.
Awesome. And now talking about lenses, Dan wanted to know what lenses do you recommend if you're going on safari? What do you find to be the most useful?
So it depends where you go on safari, because, for example, if you go in Kenya or Tanzania, you get relatively close to the animals. And so you don't need like big lenses. You don't need big zoom unless you're into birds, and then you want to get like a lens that will have like a range, let's say 150 to 600. But otherwise, I would say the best lenses for Africa is 100 to 400, somewhere in that range. Again, as I said, some people get like amazing shots with their iPhones because the animals are right there. But if you're going into the more wilder places in Africa that they're barely seeing any tourists, then the animals are going to be more skittish, and that's when you need your big guns. Otherwise, I would go 100 to 400, Nikon's 200 to 500, all the Tamron or Sigma 150 to 600. The lens that I'm using now is the Nikon's 180 to 400 with the built-in teleconverter. But until recently, I was using the older version, the 200 to 400, the f4 lens. And when I started wildlife photography, I used the kit lens that I got with my Nikon D7000. It was a 70 to 300 lens. And I must be honest, I'll tell you a little secret that one of these images with this D7000, with this lens, the 70 to 300, actually won a few awards and was shown in National Geographic. So it's obviously the gear is important and can make your work easier, but it's not all about the gear.
Awesome. Now, great question from Mike here on Zoom. Can you talk about how you pack your gear for traveling, and then how you how you carry your gear in the actual vehicles themselves?
Okay, that's a great question. I actually thought about like doing some presentation about it, but the way that when I travel, and I travel quite a bit to Africa, I usually travel with two, because I have a lot of gear with me. So I usually travel with two bags, and I bring them both on the plane. Sometimes in certain airlines, it's a little bit of arguments, because I have like, I don't know, 20 kilos in each bag. But let's say you have only one bag. So I usually carry a backpack. I have different brands using Guru Gear and my God, I'm blanking, Mindshift. So I usually use a backpack, and that has two sections. One, I put the camera and the big lens on one side, and then I always have a second, sometimes even third camera. This is very important, especially if you go to Africa. So I have them packed with the smaller lenses on the other side of the bag. The importance of a second camera is when you're in Africa, there's a lot of dust, and you don't want to start like switching lenses and so on. And sometimes things can happen very close, and then something's going to happen very far. So if you have that ability and the versatility to have two cameras, and one with the smaller lens and one with a bigger lens, that's what I would recommend. And again, in the car, I usually take the backpack with me. It depends on how booked the safari car is. If it's like a photography car, usually they're not very booked, so you have the row to yourself, so you can have the bag next to you, and that's where I keep my gear during the shoot.
Awesome. Now, speaking a little bit about gear, you mentioned you've got multiple bodies. Jess was asking, what cameras do you use?
So right now I use the Nikon Z9, which I just got this past winter. I still use my Nikon D5 that I love. I recently had the Nikon D850 that I sold not long ago, and I still have the Nikon D750, which I use mostly for remote control shooting. That's the camera that I'm willing to sacrifice. I put it on the ground, and using remote control, I photograph elephants or lions or whatever it is that comes close to the camera. So the cheapest one, that's the one that I'm willing to sacrifice. I'm not going to put my Z9 and for an elephant to step on it.
That's the sacrificial lamb.
Yeah.
Now, Andy wants to know, what was your scariest safari experience?
I mean, there've been a few scary experiences. I think that it's really hard. There are like so many moments that come to mind. One of them was a rhino that charged at our car. It's actually kind of funny story. I'll try to tell it quickly. There was a particular rhino that the guides knew about, that he's a little crazy. And they said that if we come across this rhino, whatever happens, don't back up, because if you start backing up with the car, he's going to chase you. And we drove, and the rhino is blocking our way, and he's not going anywhere. And so our guide that just hours earlier told us not to back up, he backed up, and then the rhino started charging at us. And it was starting to get dark, and the guide went off-road into the rocks, and the rhino, for like 5 minutes or so, he just ran by the side of our car, and it was an open car, and the guests there was an older couple with us, and it was quite a scary moment, but luckily the driver's skills saved us.
Wow. Well, you're here to tell about it.
I'm
So
here to tell. Yeah.
obviously we got out of that okay. Now,
Yeah.
follow up to that question, when will you publish a book of your favorite shots? That's what Andy wants to know.
Um, well, it's I'm thinking about it, but not yet. I still need to gather a little more. If more people will join me on Safari, I'll have more pictures to take, and then I'll be able to have enough material for a book, I think.
Yeah, there you go. So Andy, if you want him to publish a book, that means you're just gonna have to go on Safari a couple more times with him.
Yeah,
So
and Andy, by the way, we just added more dates in August. So if anyone wants like a last minute Safari, message us. It's gonna be a good one.
there you go. And if you can't go and you don't want to go, I'm more than willing to take the trip for you. All expenses paid, of course. So I think that covers all the questions. I did want to end. We did get a great comment from Catherine, who's joining us on Vimeo, that I wanted to share with you. She said, "I see lots of wildlife photos, much of it glorious. When I see a shot that's especially moving, hilarious, or utterly surprising, it's most often yours.
Oh,
Thank you for
thank you.
teaching us how you do that time after time." So we're glad, Catherine, that you took something away from this.
Thank you so much.
Hopefully everybody else did. Want to give a thank you again to Yaron for joining us here. I will share in that sentiment of Catherine. I love the images, especially when you got that lion to move. You got to teach me that trick. But that's all the time we have for tonight. Hopefully you'll join us again. We've got more great content coming up. And if you're wondering what that is, you can always check us out on Instagram at BH Event Space. That's how you can find out everything that we're doing. But that's all we've got, folks. This has been another edition of the B&H Virtual Event Space.